For those avid listeners who have been tuning in over the last year, it wouldn't take a genius to realize that I'm in a process of understanding what really matters most to me and being able to focus on that and prioritize the various demands on my time and my interests. And it's been a really interesting journey, a personal learning journey. So I was delighted when Greg McKeown, the speaker and author of 2 New York Times bestsellers, Effortless and Essentialism, agreed to join us on the After Dinner Leadership podcast. And I'm really pleased with the things that we discussed. For my benefit, it was super useful to think about this idea of focus and then seeking simple ways to achieve those areas of focus. And I trust that this conversation is useful for you as you consider your priorities, consider where you will get the most value from the disciplined pursuit of less. I love this quote in the middle of the book. I'm reading the book Essentialism, this one here, and there was a quote in the book here by Josh Billings, which I loved and really resonated with me at this time in terms of just establishing, what do I say yes to, what do I say no to? He says, half of the troubles of this life can be traced to saying yes too quickly and not saying no soon enough. There's some lovely truth in that statement there, and I'm working out, as I've been for many years, but still working out what those things are. Join me on the journey and take a listen. And if this conversation is useful, then please pass it on and share it with somebody else. And I hope that that you'll be able to hear some things that will help you in this process of focusing on the essential and helping to make your life more effortless as a leader. Welcome, Greg McKeown, to the After Dinner Leadership podcast. It's great to be with you.
It's such a pleasure. Thank you.
Greg, I know that you have written some really powerful books, which I've appreciated. Many others have as well. And I'd love to explore, as part of this conversation today, just some broader leadership lessons that you've learned before we get into the specifics of some of the things that you've written. I expect there'll be some overlap. And part of our routine here on the podcast is to ask a series of what I call quick fire questions, just to get to know, I guess, in a different way. People can Google you and get the more detailed version of your bio, but just a quick snapshot, quick answers on these would be wonderful. You okay for that?
Yes.
Great. Okay. Organization.
I run an organization called McKeown Inc. It really exists to be a trim tab in sharing the ideas that I've been able to research and write so that it can, let's say, box above its weight, something like that, so that the ideas that I feel can make a disproportionate difference can, in fact, make that difference.
Thank you. What food reminds you of your childhood?
My mother used to make soups of every possible kind. None of them, she was very proud of this, none of them from a recipe. So, if you liked it, you'd never have it again. But that's what it reminds me of.
Great. Who inspires you and why?
My wife Anna inspires me. She features in the things that I write for a lot of reasons. But I just was thinking about it this morning. That the very first episode of my podcast was an interview with her, and I actually had pressure at the time from the production company I was with to select one of the one of a long list of people that we could have started with. And I'm just so glad that we did that, because her wisdom is so strong and so centered. And there is I don't know the word I want to say, like there's such a blade of steel in her that's not obvious to people that don't know her as well as I do. But she's the real deal, and she inspires me constantly.
Great. Yeah, I've heard those episodes of her, and I was going to ask you about that later as well. How
Mm.
do you decompress?
There's a few things that we've come to do. I need to do it, and I need to do it more. I mean, one thing is reading in a serious way. In reading classic books, I found that to be really helpful over the last not very many years. But I mean, I'm talking about the classics like Anna Karenina or The Count of Monte Cristo. I just finished Moby Dick, which I'd never read before. I mean, none of these I'd read before, and so just reading something that stands in really uh, clear contrast to the shallow scrolling that I still spend too much time doing. But it just is so different, such a relief. So that's one answer to your question.
Right. How would you describe yourself in 3 words?
Um, I'd say intense, iconoclastic, and playful. The the last is less well known, but it's there. My children get to see that, and that's the most important people that I want to see and know that.
Thank you for that. I appreciate those insights. What is it about playful that others don't get to see? Is that something you like to reserve for family?
No, it's not deliberate. I think I'm just
Right.
intense enough and focused on really understanding the person who's in front of me, and I don't know, perhaps at a level of insecurity that okay, am I providing value? Am I doing something that's useful right now? Am I optimizing their time and my time? Maybe it grows out of that. But the people who know me best, we laugh till we cry, and it's uh, and we start that way, and we go on that way, and it's
Yeah.
that's good too.
Yeah. As I've listened to your conversations on your podcast, I, I, I'm making a leap here, but there's a deep curiosity that I hear from you, and I wonder if there's something linked to the playful in that. Sometimes the
Mm.
foil that you might have with a guest, it feels. I haven't thought of it as playful before. I thought it was kind of curious, a little bit of appropriate challenging if you disagree with the person. That maybe there's a playful spirit in that I'm now hearing as a consequence of you
Yeah, I
saying
don't
that.
know.
Yeah.
I,
Yeah.
I recently heard somebody give the following advice, and it resonated with me as far as podcasts go. They said too many podcasters are asking questions and making comments on behalf of their listeners, rather than what's actually interesting to them, what they actually think, and how they actually react to it. And that caught my attention because I've always thought that my, at least an important role, if not the priority role, was to represent the listener who isn't in the room, isn't having the conversation. But when they said it, I thought, yeah, there is a sort of authenticity that you've got to be careful about with that, because sometimes it's led me to to be nodding to something, or to be asking a question that actually I already know the answer to, or I've done a lot of research about, or but it just continues the conversation with them at a sort of surface level. And so, yeah, I think I have become a bit more challenging since I had that idea. And we'll see. I don't know if the guests love it. I don't know if the listeners love it, but it definitely makes the conversations more real. I think that's what's come out of it.
Greg, it's also a tradition of ours to listen to your thoughts around the leadership lessons that you wish you'd learned earlier. A little bit
Mm.
of kind of a reflection point here, and I'm always really interested to find out what's on people's minds at this stage of your career. What 3 leadership lessons do you wish you'd learned earlier?
Well, one thing I wish I'd learned earlier was like to argue sooner. Like to bring a small but real conflict to the surface as soon as possible. I mean, with an employee, I mean specifically.
Yeah.
Because in fact, I just was interviewing somebody. Well, no, I wasn't really interviewing them. I was having a conversation with them, but I suppose it felt a bit like an interview. And they're one of the most, I mean, they described themselves as perhaps the top 10 people in the world with knowledge in negotiation. I thought that was interesting, and I think that's true. They've spent the last 30 years either practicing at very, very high stakes negotiations around the world, or teaching it at impressive institutions. And so, anyway, they defined relationship as someone you can solve problems with. Yeah. That's what a relationship is. And I think that that's a good description. Where I think I've made my primary leadership mistakes have been not addressing something soon enough. And so the problem with that is that of course it builds because it's unresolved, but then what you're doing is you're putting massive pressure on that future conversation, because if you're not willing to address it today while it's small because it's uncomfortable, because you've got other things to do, well, why do you think that tomorrow, when it's 10% more awkward and more stressful, that you're going to deal with it well then? And the same logic goes. And so I've learned, in fact, I don't mean that you create conflict. The conflict's there, but the very moment you have it, you deal with it right then.
Yes.
Because what you're actually doing is stress testing the relationship and growing it. Because by dealing with the conflict and dealing with it successfully together, you both now know we can deal with this level of problem. And then then the next problem comes along, and now you know. And so there's a higher level of trust in the relationship because you have proven to each other that you can navigate these things, and you will, and so that there aren't hidden things not being talked about. So that's one of the things that I would say. I think the second leadership lesson for me is having criteria for hiring, like having the right criteria for hiring. I mean, I think everybody, when they first start out, if they're literally hiring somebody for the first time, they don't really know what they're doing. I mean, they're just trying to find somebody to do a certain job. And that's how I think it's been for me. Criteria that I use now, I borrowed from Warren Buffett. I write about this in a book I wrote called Effortless, which is, I better step back just now that I've mentioned that. So Essentialism, which I know we'll get to, but is about focus, and Effortless is about simplification. So that's how those work together. But in Effortless, one of the chapters is about trust, and really particularly hiring high trust people. And Warren Buffett has his own criteria that he's identified after many, many years of working with superb people, and not high trust people and not high trust people. And so his criteria are the following three things: integrity, intelligence, and initiative. So I've come to think of those as the three I's. And he points out that integrity is the most important of the three, because if you don't have that, then the other two will hurt you. And so now when I'm interviewing somebody, or if I'm choosing to work with somebody, I'm using those three questions. On a scale of 1 to 10, how high is their integrity? On a scale of 1 to 10, how high is their intelligence? On a scale of 1 to 10, how high is their initiative? And I'm looking for 9s or 10s on all three. And it makes the whole world of difference, because the right person, they'll take longer to find. You might be a person short for a while, but once you have them, you're going to be able to get aligned, and they're going to do so many things without needing the prod or the guidance and so on, because they're ready to move. And so that's been a very helpful rule of thumb. I wish I'd had that from the beginning.
How did Just
Yeah,
a
go on.
question on that, Greg. The first one, what do you use to help you to determine integrity with someone that you've not got a particularly long track record with?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really valid question. One answer to that question is I don't generally hire people that I don't have a long track record with. So that's one answer to the question. So if
Yeah.
I can possibly work with somebody in a sort of not ad hoc way, but on a project, for example,
Yes.
and experience working together, that makes a big difference. The other thing is that, of course, with everything in our network, the type of people that you spend time with and that you work with will introduce you to people like them, and so that's. I mean, this is network on network, because it's a very high leverage decision. I remember getting to know the coach of the Highland High School rugby team. This is the coach that's featured in the movie Forever Strong, the winningest team in American history. It's the high school rugby team that's I mean, they've just been so undefeated. They've won, I think, 21 of 25 national championships, and it goes on and on. Their record is unbelievable. And I remember when I was talking to him one time, he said, "Look, one of the things I teach the young men that I'm responsible for is the number one decision of your whole life will be the friends you choose." And he says, because eventually you will do what they do. And I think I think that really is correct. And I don't think it's true just as teenagers. I mean, I think it's true as you go forward. And so the really seriously deliberate, careful selection of the people that you allow into your inner circle is I think it is I think it's the most important decision that you make in life, and it's sort of a full cycle back to an answer I gave earlier about Anna, because as soon as you say, okay, this is the person, right, your highest single decision in your life is the person that you marry. I mean, that's certainly been true for me, and I think it's true for just about anybody who I think it's just true for anybody, whether the marriage works out or not. I think it's true for everybody, and so because they introduce you to everybody else, you absorb their patterns, and I mean, there's some fascinating research that suggests that it's not just that. Well, it was this big meta study that was done on networking, and it shows that a friend of your friend, right? If a friend of your friend puts on weight, there is a percentage impact of that on you. You don't even know them. You've never met them, but it's measurable impact. The friend of your friend putting on weight means that there is an increased probability that you will put on weight. That's the power of a network. I mean, that's the power of finding the right people. And so certainly early on in your life, finding those right few people has just changed your whole life.
It's interesting. Anna's entered the conversation again, so let's talk about her in a little bit more detail. Like hiring and choosing someone to marry. I know it's not quite the same thing, but these choices around relationships is absolutely key. I'm interested in this. How have you prioritized that relationship in your life? Because my listening to your conversations with her, I can see that that's been the case, and unfortunately, many marriages do end in divorce. What have you done to ensure that that relationship has stayed as strong as it has?
When we were very first married, we had a chance. I don't remember why, but we had a sit down with church leader Jeffrey R. Holland, and his marriage appeared to us to be really exemplary And it's it is hard to know what other people's relationships are like, behind
Yeah.
closed doors and so on. I think that is hard to know. But you can still tell the feeling that exists with them. And I'd observed them actually in a few different settings, and a couple of them very up close and personal. And their attentiveness, his attentiveness particularly to her, was really notable. Multiple
Yes.
times. I mean, multiple times a minute. As they're walking along, just multiple touching of her back, just as they're walking, and so there was enough data to support that. He knew what he was talking about, and so that we asked him, okay, so what do you think it takes? I mean, this is a first year of marriage, and for us, and he said, listen, he said, one piece of advice that's made a difference to me is if with marriage, if you work hard at it, it's easy if you work hard at it, and it's hard if you work easy at it. And that has been a really great test.
That's great.
Because it's not just a good general piece of advice. It's a litmus test that you can use all the time. You say, as soon as you go, oh, this is getting a bit tense, or there's a bit of friction here. You know why. You have a litmus test and a diagnosis in that little piece of wisdom. And so then you can adjust and go, oh, we need to work on this. We need to actually invest in making time for each other. I mean, there's all sorts of other things that we've done around routine, which I think is non-trivial. If you can build a routine that you can count on, going on a date every week, like that, for example, like these routines, and there's lots more routines, are a big deal, because once you build them in and have them and don't question them, then you sort of forget them in one sense. They become effortless. Now you've got something that's absolutely essential.
Yes.
And you're not having to wait until things are bad before you adjust. The routine keeps you in a certain range. And so most of the time you're in a good to great range. And if you're not, you definitely notice. And of course, sometimes we're not, of course. But those are some of the things that I think have really mattered. I had one more thing, which is really listening, really understanding. I don't mean just being silent. I don't mean passive listening. I mean apex listening. I mean losing yourself, shelving your own agenda, losing yourself inside of somebody else in a kind of using 3D empathy, where you get to see their world inside of them. That has been extremely valuable to us. And I don't know. I mean, without that, I learned that, at a very particular point in my life, and that opened up the world to me. That opened up the world of relationships to me in such an intimate, deep, and useful way. And so that's those are some of the answers I would
Thanks,
offer.
Greg. I really appreciate that and sharing. I know that relationships really important to you, but I'm grateful for you bringing Anna into the conversations that you have on your podcast and giving some insight into such an important relationship. My senses is a key part of who you are, and as I've listened to your conversations, I've certainly learned a lot. That's been helpful for me. And if I've got a bit of a shiny forehead, one of my routines is to go on an evening walk as the weather permits, with my wife just before we came onto this recording. So, and that that half an hour is priceless in terms of what we learn as we slow down and just spend some time in slightly more ad hoc conversation. It's very powerful. Wonderful. Now, what's the third lesson? I'd love to just complete that picture if we may. And what's the third lesson?
Yeah. Okay. Third lesson. I think I would just say, look, it all works out, and better than you think. That's what I would say. And it's hard to remember that. Like even now in my life, it's hard to remember that in 10 years I'll probably say to myself now, I would want to say to myself now, it all works out and better than you think, But so far that has been so true, so remarkably true. At some point, maybe I will absorb the spirit of that, so that I can live in the output. Why do you say that to a former self? What is it you'd want the former self to do differently as a result of that advice? And I think it speaks to kind of relaxing a bit. One way to think about the life of an author is that you can look at what they write about and think, oh, well, that may be what they struggle with, that they're interested in it because they want to be strong in an area. Maybe they're not strong in that area. I mean, that's one way to think about it. And it's not the only criteria I think a person would use. But when I think about this advice to my former self, and then I think about particularly Effortless, there's kind of a practical output, which is the 85% rule. And I think that would make my advice to my former self more tangible. Is live by the 85% rule, and the 85% rule is a useful rule of thumb to say you will actually make more progress and be more joyful in the journey if you operate at the 85% level versus the 100% level, or the 110%, whatever that means, or the 150%, whatever that means. If you're in the 85% level, you're actually in an optimal position. So you're still engaged, and you're still giving, and you're still putting in effort, but not to the point that you're perpetually in red brain, not to the point that you're on the edge of burnout. That 85% rule that's where you're focused and you're working, but you're also being playful. You're also enjoying that journey and noticing it and being grateful for the journey that you're in, remembering these are the good old days we're in right now. And so I think the 85% rule would be the tangible advice I would want to give to my former self. I'd give my former self Effortless, maybe even more than Essentialism. I'd say, look, there's a simpler, better way to do this, and you'll be grateful that you did it that way.